Braving the cold and or colder and rainy weather today. In this budget session, we are not going to have any public comment. We are planning on another meeting for public comment with the board. That has not been determined and format has not yet been decided, but everybody will be informed as to what that will be. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Don Phipps.
Thank you. In just a moment, I'd like to move down to the podium so I can address the board and be able to see the screens that I'll be presenting on. I want to give an update just on the coronavirus in terms of its impact to us. And I have to say publicly the support that we've seen from our community, the work that's gone on inside the school system with teachers and administrators and classified staff pulling together to do some things in an unprecedented way, in an unprecedented time, has been extraordinary. We just took part in a conference call or a press conference with the governor, and they have now made the announcement that our schools will remain closed for instruction until at least May the 15th. And that's following CDC advice in terms of gatherings. So we'll continue to follow that and do the work that needs to be done. A lot of that will be work that's pushed out electronically, digitally. We're also trying to make sure that we have hard copies and tangible copies for students that may not have resources. We continue to work with community partners to find where we have gaps and to try to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students. So I want to say on behalf of our board, we're very grateful to all of our staff members, the team members, the work that's going on, and that we know will continue to go on. These things are changing hour by hour, but we've been able to keep our head above water following the guidance that we've gotten from the state. So we're grateful for that. Can I move down?
Okay, sure, go ahead.
I want to share what I call the budget update. As you all know, I'm going to take you back to our audit meeting that we had back in November, December, whatever that time frame was, and there was a very clear call, I think, from the auditors at that time for the staff here to put together a budget for you this year that does not allocate the allocation of any of our fund balance. And we know that through the last few years we've used fund balance. This year we're allocating, if we budget and we go where we plan on being, about $2.5 million, which would leave us just a little bit more than that in terms of where we are moving forward. And we cannot continue to function that way. I do want to note that we've saved $1.1 million from about a year and a half ago. So the current budget that we're in right now, and that's a result of many positions being eliminated. And at the time that we're doing our work now, we've not had anybody who's lost a job, and I'm proud of that. But we're taking a look at attrition and where positions come open and then making determinations as to whether or not we refill those positions. But there's some focus areas of our budget work, and just for our community members to see what we're working on. The board's certainly well aware of this. We've got an ongoing effort to work to reduce, and I want to say eliminate, the use of our fund balance. And the only way to do that is to get our spending down and to make cuts where we can, so that we're not having to dip into what is essentially our savings fund, because you cannot live off of that long term. And I think we've seen the impact of that over the last few years, and we want to make sure we're making these decisions. They're tough decisions. There's not a single budget decision that we've made that's been easy, that we were able to pull off and say we got that and we can mark it off. Everything that we talk about has implications, and they're hurtful in many ways, and we want to make sure that we're sensitive to that as we consider what we're doing. The auditors in 2019, late in the year, as we had our report, suggested that the staff bring back to the board a budget proposal for 2021, the year 2020-2021, with no budgeted appropriation of fund balance. And in order to accomplish that, what we're trying to do is eliminate $2.5 million out of our budget. That's the target.
You need to check your mic.
Is it good? Can you hear me now? Okay. So again, just my microphone was not on. For those online, I want the folks that are streaming, I'd like for them to be able to hear what we're talking about. The focus of our budget work is the ongoing work to reduce or eliminate our use of fund balance. Our auditors have suggested a budget be proposed and presented to the board for this upcoming academic year that did not appropriate any fund balance. That means it's a $2.5 million cut from our current budget, which is a $1.1 million cut from the previous year's budget. Many positions have not been filled since July 2018. That number you'll see in just a few minutes is actually 90 plus, and that doesn't take into account many of the positions that we're looking at in the current budget proposal that we're going to have. The current budget reflects a $1.1 million cut from the previous year's budget, as I mentioned, and then we have several unknowns that I want to spend a little bit of time talking to as we wrap things up. The next slide that I have is what we call proposed cuts. And this is in our planning, and this is coming from our leadership team, and will ultimately wind up being a part of what's in the budget or what's cut out of our budget proposal. But I wanted you to know where we were at. I told many of you after we left the auditors meeting, and we knew we had a $2.5 million cut, that those cuts would probably involve buildings and facilities to some degree when you're talking about that amount of money that we're looking at. It was unclear to me then at that point exactly what we were looking at. Our leadership team has considered many different issues and areas to work on, and I want to share with you where we are as we speak today, knowing that there may be some minor changes as we go through. In the area of program and agency support, our recommendation is going to be that we eliminate from that $46,112. And this is an across-the-board 10% cut to the funding that we have for some agencies. And there's some other tweaks that may not be exactly 10% that I can go by and give you bullet by bullet as we put this together. But one of the areas that we've talked about was what we're doing in terms of our support of agencies. I've called every agency that's involved. I've let them make them aware of the constraints that we're operating under, and I wanted to make sure that the cuts that we made weren't so severe that that agency couldn't continue to function, and that the services provided to our students or our faculty, whatever they may be, would still be intact and be beneficial. So that number that you see there is just over $45,000. The next is on transportation. And the two round numbers that you see really are estimates, and I'm trying to be fairly conservative but be realistic as well. The $100,000 transportation piece, as you see in parentheses, is based on efforts to increase our transportation efficiency rating. And to do that, we need to park buses, we need to get ridership up, and we've talked about 6 schools that we were looking at consolidating routes so that middle school and elementary would ride together. We're also looking at parking buses at some of our other schools to make sure that we get our ridership up. Being mindful of the length of a bus route, too. We want to be aware of that so that there's a balance that we strike. If we're able to get our efficiency rating up, then we feel like we can pull down a larger percentage of the transportation dollars that are available in Raleigh. And we've put $100,000. That could potentially approach or go over $200,000, or it may be $50,000 or $70,000. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we're working hard on that effort to try to make sure that our transportation efficiency increases. The second and one of the largest ones that we're going to have, 88% of our budget is personnel. So when we make significant cuts, those cuts are going to come in the area of personnel more than likely. We're still processing where we're at through attrition. As individuals make retirement decisions, we're looking at those cases on a case-by-case basis. We're looking at whether or not we're filling those positions or we're consolidating those positions into other positions, exactly what's going on. This process continues to happen. To date, where we are right now, as we move forward, is that we've captured in the upcoming year an additional $657,983 in personnel cuts. But you all feel it, you see it. It's the 90 plus positions that we're talking about. We feel it at the Ed Center. We're about $500,000 in salary cut from where we were 12 to 18 months ago in terms of positions that we've not filled back. I wanted to note that since July of 2018, 90 plus positions not filled, not considering some of those that are going to be in the 2021 budget. I think when the dust settles and we're finished with the budget cuts and we feel like we're on level ground, we probably will be down somewhere around 120 positions, which is tough. That's hard. It's a lot of difficult cuts, but decisions that have to be made, many of those based on our average daily membership and what schools in our school district are allotted from the state positions. Otherwise, we have to pay for those out of our local appropriation.
And then I've mentioned the Ed Center as well. We also had 2 positions that we combined into, consolidated into a position for a total savings you can see on the screen of $500,159. And that number, I'm sure, will go up between now and the time that the final budget is put together. We're also talking to individual departments, and we're looking at where they're at with respect to what their budget is and their spending. These are tied, these conversations and the ultimate decisions are tied to personnel above that. But we feel like there's $200,000 in additional savings that we'll be able to get, not yet completed. But again, these are tied to personnel. So as these departmental savings are realized, then the personnel number is likely going to increase. We're looking at things like subscriptions and resources that we have and whether or not there's some things there that we can cut. But for the most part, these are going to be additional personnel costs out of our department areas. We've discussed indirect cost. We've talked about that. It's not a process that our school system has gone through, but I wanted you to be aware, and this came up from the auditors, also talking with David in school finance. $502,000 of indirect costs charged to child nutrition and wraparound. This is 2 enterprise entities, 2 enterprise operations that use our facilities and our equipment and our utilities, and it's allowable for us to charge indirect cost. But I think it's very important that we note that we cannot charge that amount of indirect cost every year. They can't survive that. So if there is an indirect cost ongoing beyond what we have here, it will be at a substantially smaller amount. But that would be something that we could carry over as we move forward. So if you take a look at those, without Oak Hill closure considered, we're at $1,506,095. And I think, in any given year, if you talk about making cuts, and last year we cut deep, we cut hard, we cut a lot. We had to make significant changes, and we netted about $1.1 million. So what I've shared with you up to this point are additional cuts, brand new savings, for lack of a better term, and they equal 1.5, a little bit over $1.5 million. And if we could stop at that point, I'd feel like we've done a lot of work. We've made cuts that are going to impact us in many ways. We want to continue to serve and be able to provide quality services the best that we can. But when we're challenged to hit $2.5 million with what we've done already, we know that we've got a lot of work to do. So the building and facilities conversation that I've had with our senior staff was looking at the closure of Oak Hill. And again, these are put out for you to consider. And, we can go through any of the bullets that are there, and we can try to address it in a different way. But if you take a look at what we have at Oak Hill on campus, using current vacancies and the 3-year average for utilities that we have, if that school was closed, it would be a savings to our school system of $984,994. Now, I say that it's a savings to the school system, but it comes at a great cost. And you all know that, and we've heard many comments from the community, the cost of the to the community, the cost of the kind of legacy that exists there in Oak Hill. There are parents that are a part of that school who value the small setting and the things that go on in the K-8 environment. So I don't put these numbers out there and say I want you to take these hook, line, and sinker without consideration or questions. We're simply putting numbers on the table to try to get to the $2.5 million. That's also why I think it's so important that we have the opportunity to hear from members of the community to get that feedback before any decisions or even have the conversations about those decisions. But what we have on the table here, and the reason why I have it listed, is that we've gone through and looked at our current vacancy list that we have in the school system. And we can accommodate nearly every employee that's at Oak Hill with current vacancies so that they would continue to be employed and nobody would lose a job. If there's anybody that is in a vacant, that has a position for whatever it happens to be, that we don't have a vacancy for, we would have to carry that salary until a vacancy opens up. And I'm very, very confident that vacancies would open sometime between now and the end of the year. What I don't know is if we were to have the same conversation a year from now or 2 years from now or 5 years from now, what would our vacancies look like at that period of time? And could you accommodate the folks that are in those positions into existing vacancies? That's how we're able to save the amount of money that we have. I can't tell you whether they'd be local or state. That really depends on salaries that we're looking at. We always try to pick up the more expensive salaries on the state side and the less expensive on local. So that would be moving folks back and forth depending on what we have with other employees and the pay that they have. And the utilities, and I'm rounding the number, if you'll give me liberty to do that, is around $51,000 is a 3-year average of the utilities for that particular campus. So if you put it in, and I know that was a busy slide, if you put that together with exactly what I've shared with you, the numbers look like what you see displayed here with programs and agencies. Again, transportation, I would put an asterisk beside that. I'd put an asterisk beside personnel. I'd put an asterisk beside departments. I'd put an asterisk beside Oak Hill closure because we don't know what's going to happen with those numbers. We do feel confident with the program and agency number where we are. We feel confident where we are with indirect costs, but I need to add to you in full disclosure and transparency. We don't know what's going to happen with those two entities with what's going on with us right now with the virus. And the fact that we've not been in school, wrap around, if students aren't there, they don't have the ability to work unless they're doing special meetings or training. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to them in terms of the ability to pay for the indirect costs, but that's what we have right now. So you can see the bottom line there is just under $2.5 million, which is a target that we were trying to reach, and we're close to that. But there's some things I want you to be aware of that go on too, as well as unknowns. We don't know what our low wealth funding is, and for the folks in the audience, low wealth funding is a supplemental funding that comes above and beyond. It goes above what we get from the state for average daily membership, and it's tied into the poverty rating of a school system. The formula itself is very convoluted. It's several pages long, but really it's based on the taxing authority and
the level of taxing that our county commissioners are at, and there's several other factors that are there. The low wealth funding percentage in terms of what we qualify for can change every year, and the amount of money available in that fund from the state can change a little bit every year. I think this year we're drawing about 88% of what we could. Last year we were about 90% of what we could, but this year the dollar amount went up even though our percentage went down. And I believe the reason for that is that the amount of money available at the state level was greater. And for that, very likely because there's some school districts that qualify this year that don't qualify in previous years or future years may not qualify.
Pardon one more time, sorry. Give us just a second to make sure it's working.
I'll keep talking. If they need to come in and move me to another mic, we will. The low wealth piece is you qualify for low wealth funding. There's another supplemental funding stream that's in North Carolina that we do not qualify for that you'll hear occasionally called small school funding. In small school funding, there's a threshold, and it's somewhere around 2,000 students per school system that you qualify for. We're not anywhere near that, so we don't get a supplemental funding from that particular source, but we do qualify for low wealth.
Sorry. There's gonna be something wrong with all you guys.
Let me go up to the table up there where the mic is at.
You sure?
Yeah.
Could you use this one?
I don't want to talk to your backs, but there may be a need for me to be here just so the mic can pick me up. So the low wealth funding is one of the unknowns that we're dealing with. We don't know what it's going to look like for the 2021 school year. We have some ideas to go back and look at where we are. Prior to this year that we're in, we had lost about $1.4 million over the last 4 years in low wealth funding, primarily tied to the overall loss of students. Our ADM is declining in the county. As you all know, we've lost students, and a lot of the funding that comes down is tied to that. Another piece is a local appropriation, the current expense fund, and this is what we get from the county commissioners. That's an unknown at this point in time. By law, I'm required to have a budget to the county commissioners by the 15th of May. I like to have that done in the month of April if I can, so it gives us an opportunity to go through and tweak and do what we need to do. But we don't know yet what the local appropriation from county commissioners is going to be. And I think the next bullet is fairly significant, and we've talked about this quite a bit. What I call fixed cost increases for locally paid employees. And fixed cost increases include things like retirement and health care. And I think the general population may not know what that really does to us in terms of a burden. And we certainly hope folks get raises, but if there's a raise given to any employees across the state, if we pay for people that are in that same job role locally, then we pass that same raise along to them. What we're estimating is, even without a raise, just fixed cost increase for us to maintain what we have moving forward is going to be an additional $143,000. So that would be the minimum request that we would make, and we haven't put a number on paper yet with what we're going to ask for our commissioners, but just to maintain where we are. Let me explain why that is. The following are proposed, and these are pieces of information that are given to us from the state. And again, I don't know if anything's going to change based on where the virus is or anything, but proposed right now, retirement for us is going from 19.70 to 21.44. And this is a cost that we incur for each one of our locally paid employees. If they're state-paid employees, the state passes this along when they give raises and from one year to the next. But for locally paid employees, we pick this up on our own. And then significant is the second bullet below that, which is health insurance, and that's $327 per employee increase. And we know it's expensive, but when you're the entity paying it, you don't realize how much it is until you look at that and do your multiplication over the number of employees that you have. So if you just do the numbers with that, with the number of locally paid employees that we have, we need at least $143,000 just to maintain the level of where we're at in terms of our local support. And then the impact that we just don't know the answer to right now is the current situation with the virus and the virus response. There are very likely, well, there are costs that we have that we hope that we can incur, or that we can get money back from FEMA and the federal government. As we look at, we try to keep up with everything that we're spending money on. We had a request from the hospital last week, and they wanted to know if we had any of the N95, whatever the masks are that we use in some of our shop classes, goggles and protective eyewear, because they don't have enough of those. They're not running out yet, but there's a short supply at the hospital. We had an overwhelming response from our high schools that pulled together boxes of those filtered masks that were unopened that we took over to the hospital. We want to make sure that we document what we contributed to the hospital. We're not going to get that material back, but we want to make sure that we can pay for that, because when students come back and they're ready to do that work, we need to have those materials and supplies available for them. So we know that there are costs. There are costs associated with us running our transportation fleet to the extent that we are to deliver meals. That transportation cost is coming out of our budget right now, and we'll eventually make a request from the federal government to be reimbursed, but we don't know if we're going to get that back or not. So we don't know what that cost is going to be. And then it's really odd to say savings and try to find a glimmer of hope in the situation that we're in, but from a budget standpoint, if you think about the number of trips that would have been made in the month of March, April, and May, that would have been conference type things. I had a statewide superintendent's conference in Wilmington that was supposed to start this week. You know, that's per diem for meals, that's travel, that's hotel reservations, it's conference registration that we're not paying over and over and over again across our district. So there'll certainly be some savings in terms of what we would have paid that we're not going to pay, but we don't know what those are going to be yet. We can't forecast that. We can tell you at the end of the day, we've got to compare what the costs are minus what we're not able to get reimbursed, and then what our savings are to find out whether or not we'll be in a better shape. It's possible. You know, we've talked about hitting fund balance somewhere around $2.5 million this year, that if we continue to operate the way that we're operating and we don't have travel, that we may be able to cut back on the 2.5 that we were planning to take out of fund balance this year. But I think it needs to be very honestly conveyed to you that that's an anomaly, and that happened by accident in many ways. You know, my goal would be that we'd stay where we're budgeted or come just under that. I can't take any credit for that and don't want to. I want you to know what the real budget situation is. So when we come back, what we want to be able to say at the end of the year, when we give you an updated accounting, is this is where we thought we were going to be, this is where we're at, and this is the reason why we are where we are. What I don't want to do is spend more than $2.5 million of what we appropriated. So we have also lapsed salary, individuals who had positions that were with the school system and they retired or resigned, or they're no longer with us for whatever reason. If we've not filled those positions, that lapsed salary will work to our benefit. So all of those things come into play, and that's what the general accounting at the end of the year will help us do to determine whether or not we had to go into the fund balance to the extent that we are planning to go to, which would be, again, $2.5 million. the proposals that we have in terms of what we're looking at would cut out essentially $2.5 million. It's just a little bit under that. And those numbers are going to change a little, those rounded numbers of 100,000. We won't realize that real number until we're finished with the school year next year to know what our efficiency formula netted us and how much we were able to save on transportation. We also don't know the department numbers until I have an opportunity to go through and meet with those individuals and determine exactly what types of cuts or savings that we may be able to realize. But I want to share this with you so that we can have a conversation, so that you can consider where we are. And certainly if there are additional ways to be able to get to the money, we want to look at that. You know, I could come to you, I would hope that as we look at this, you say 1.5 is quite a movement to make in 1 year. To me, it's an extraordinary movement to make in 1 year when you made 1.1 the year before. So really what we're talking about is 2.6, or we're talking about $3.6 million of savings over a 2-year time period. Again, that doesn't come without a cost. And every one of the decisions that we've made have been difficult decisions. There's not a thing on here that's not a hard decision to make. But if in the end I came to you with 1.7 million, it's not the goal of 2.8, but it's better than where we were. And if that's what the board elects to move on with, then we certainly can look at that. But our task, and really based on what we were told by the auditors and where I felt like we needed to be, was to make the complete cut of the additional amount, which was $2.5 million. My thought was it was going to take us 3 years to get to a situation where we weren't allocating fund balance anymore. If we do what we're doing now, we'd get there in 2 years. And I don't know whether in the long run that's a good thing or a bad thing. I just know in the long run you can't continue to live off savings when you're budgeting that way, and those are the things that we've tried to do. I think it's important to be fiscally responsible. I think the taxpayers deserve to know that monies are being spent wisely, and that and I think part of that is for us to be able to document what we're spending money on and the return on investment that we're given, which is one of the reasons that I've mentioned as we get on level ground, I hope we can expand in some areas. And one of the positions that I would like to have at some point, whether it's a new position or somebody who takes on the responsibility, is someone who doesn't do anything but program evaluation, to take a look at where we're spending big dollars, little dollars, medium dollars, any dollars, and determine whether or not the money that's being spent is yielding the kind of return that it should. In the business world, you do it on a regular basis. In the education world, we shouldn't be any different. If we're not getting a positive return, we need to question what's going on and determine whether or not we need to continue to spend money in that area. I am certainly open and willing to listen to anything else that you all feel like needs to be included there. As I've shared with you, this is not a meeting to vote on what we do with Oak Hill. There are several things I think that need to be done, including community feedback and comments that we want to hear from the folks in the Oak Hill community, and perhaps folks that aren't in Oak Hill that have an opinion district-wide about where we're at and some of the dilemmas that we're dealing with. But are there questions from the board that I can entertain? Or any additional information that you want concerning what's been presented here?
Chairman Pam, is it okay if I make a motion? I'd like to make a motion that Dr. Phipps and his cabinet conduct a thorough study of Oak Hill School, continuing to remain open for 2020-21 and for closing Oak Hill School for 2020-2021.
Could you repeat that, please, Madam?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that Dr. Phipps and his cabinet do a thorough study of how it would look for our budget if Oak Hill remains open for next school year and if Oak Hill closes for next school year. To provide all the information, all the data possible so that we make the best decision possible for everybody.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
Second the motion.
Any comments or questions at this point?
So for clarification, all this would be is study the pros of it staying open, the pros of it closing. Is that correct?
I think we'd look at the pros and the cons on both sides.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
pros and cons of it closing, pros and cons of it staying open.
Yep.
Well, I would like for it to also include how it impacts children at Oak Hill, children at surrounding districts, and district lines.
Can you, I mean, the motion's out, can you sort of explain what you would be studying to do that?
We would look at bus routes, we'd look at enrollment numbers, we'd look at the impact on families. I mean, the state law indicates if you're looking at consolidation or closing of schools, there are certain things that have to be considered, but we want to know all of that. We want to look at if Oak Hill were to operate just like it is now next year, what are the pros and cons of that? If it were to close, what would it look like? And for me, when I think about that, I'm thinking about where would students go to school? What's the attendance pattern in terms of where they would go to school, what the bus routes look like, how much time the bus routes would take, those kinds of, the capacity that we have at our schools, what it would do in terms of enrollment, those kinds of things that need to be looked at.
Would it look at any changing of a district line or anything like that? I mean, is that part of what would be looked at to move students one direction or another?
I think consider all of those things.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
if you think of other things that we've not mentioned here, all the information possible, I think we would welcome.
And our leadership team has put a lot of work in, and we've consulted with folks, but I think it helps to have somebody from the outside objectively to take a look at what we've got and give some feedback too. And I would certainly seek some folks that could do that kind of work as well.
Dr. Phipps, what would be the timeline on this? Would we have all this information in time to prepare the budget and to know, do you have, I know she just made the motion, but do you have an idea of the timeline?
I don't know, it'll be sometime in April before we could get everything completed, I'm sure.
I'm sure it would take a long time.
You said in April?
Yeah, it would have to, yes.
I mean. I
I have to have a budget by law.
You said in or end of April.
Well, I'm saying in the month of
In the
April.
month of
I don't know where at in the month of April.
Correct.
And in light of what we're dealing with now, the ability to pull people together and where people are at, I don't know. But we'll convene those kind of meetings. But I think it's important to have the community feedback before we get into that too. Which is why it's, and I think everybody here agrees that we need to reschedule the meeting that we had for last week. And it's going to be a different format. I mean, we just listened to the governor's most recent press conference, and we can't meet the way that we are used to meeting. And I don't like that. But we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity and a vehicle to be able to communicate and have a question asked of the board.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
Now, I don't have a problem having continued conversation and giving you more updated numbers, but I believe if Oak Hill is the topic of conversation, short of getting feedback from the community, I think you need to see what the results look like of the data that we've already collected and the data that we're going to collect. And I'm going to be as neutral as I possibly can be in terms of collecting it and letting it paint a picture for you all to be interpreted the way that you want to interpret it and make the decision based on that.
Thank you.
Anything else, Dr. Phipps?
Now, again, this is our first pass of actual numbers that I have in front of me. These will be tweaked a little bit, but I wanted you to know where we were at as we try to go after the 2.5 million. And I really wanted you to know where we were short of Oak Hill, because that's such a topic of conversation that number is 1.5, which in a given year would be good, but is not where we need to be right now.
Any other comment from anybody?
Is it appropriate to ask questions? May we ask questions about
Sure.
a couple of things that were in here? Is that
Yeah.
appropriate or?
Go ahead.
say that?
Go ahead.
Appropriate. Dr. Phipps, one of the things that you mentioned on here was that you called agencies and programs, and they're aware that there's a possible cut for that. Could you just elaborate on that just a little bit for me personally?
When we started to look at what we were doing with agency support, our thought was to look at 50% or 25% cut. And then as we went through and looked at the agency, some of the numbers aren't great numbers, but for those community agencies, that what seems to us to be a small amount of money when you're dealing with $120 million, to them is a great deal of money. And I felt like if we could cut 10% and net us nearly $50,000 and allow them to continue on. I've talked to each executive director or director of the agencies, and we talked about a 10% cut, and they're able to absorb that. I hope that as we move forward that we're able to give them, support back at the normal level of where we've been, but that's what that is.
Thank you.
Anything else?
For clarification, name some of those agencies.
Adolescent Health, the Science Center, Smart Start, the Arts Council,
CIS.
the Community in Schools, agencies like that. They provide direct services to our students. We certainly don't want to cut them so deep that we can't work. And that's part of why I wanted to reach out. Number one, I wanted to make sure that the agencies that we're talking about didn't read about it in the paper or find out on the street what we were looking at. And then I also wanted to make sure that the cuts that we were talking about was sustainable. That could they absorb that in a year and still be able to move on? And that's what the intent of that conversation was.
Any other questions, comments? Well, before we adjourn, I think the board certainly wants to thank all of the staff and teachers who have been quite creative and innovative during this terrible time that we find ourselves in. And we have to all be very, very cautious. And they have been in contact with their students and been using the computers to transmit assignments or in various other ways. There have been those who have provided food throughout the county during this period of time and will continue to do that. We certainly want to thank the parents and the children for the flexibility that this has created in all of us. It's a different kind of time. It's something we have never gone through. We just appreciate everybody's support, and we feel like that in the end we'll come out stronger because collectively we have all worked together and gotten through this terrible situation. But everybody needs to take the precautions that have been established for us and just be safe every day, wash your hands, do those kinds of things. I think most all of us are probably washing our hands 10, 15, 20 times a day. Just something to continue to do. But thank you to all of Caldwell County and their efforts in trying to do what we're supposed to do and to keep this virus away from our community as best we possibly can. Do I hear a motion we adjourn?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And we are adjourned. Thank you for being here.